So thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate it. Welcome to our VMware Horizon 8 webinar. And we have our featured speaker, Damian Burley from 27 Virtual. My name is Andrew Grismore from 27 Virtual, and really happy to have you guys here today. We're going to get an awesome overview from Damian of the Horizon Cloud Pod architecture. But before we do, I just want to give you guys a quick introduction to 27 Virtual. We'll let Damian give a quick intro, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So just so you guys know, 27 Virtual is a VMware partner, and we specialize in providing VMware services. Now, we mostly focus within the realm of the more advanced VMware capabilities. In this case, we're going to be talking about Horizon, but we have experience in most, if not all, of the more advanced VMware capabilities. So we're talking VMware Cloud Foundation, we're talking NSX, which is what we were founded on. That's kind of our specialty. We have been doing NSX deployments from the beginning, and we actually did the initial training for VMware itself and the partners and new customers when NSX first came out. We run the NSX Ninja program, but again, we also do vSAN, the vRealize suite, so VRA, and again, just across those more advanced capabilities of the VMware platform portfolio. So just to give you guys an idea, we're always focused on education. That's why we do these webinars. We're trying to get the word out on these products, the new capabilities, and make sure that as many people as possible are enabled on these solutions. And if you do happen to work with us, or if you've worked with us in the past, then you'll know that knowledge transfer is a big part of what we do. It's inherent to our blood. A lot of us are former instructors. You know, I've taught the VMware NSX classes for education in the Ninja program and all that. So it's just a part of what we do. And we make sure that by the end of any engagement that customers have with us, they're really fully enabled on the products that we're dealing with, and they have full ownership and knowledge around the solutions. So that's a little bit about us. We're Florida based for the most part, and I'm in Orlando, Florida. Damian's in Florida as well. But Damian, you want to give a quick intro and then go ahead and lead us into the Horizon portion?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. So my name is Damian, and as Andrew says, so I'm part of the professional services, and basically my bread and butter is working on the EUC solution for VMware, and also everything about automation and operation, like all about VRA, VROps, VRO, and also, of course, all the Horizon suite. So I've been in that space for quite some time now. I think I basically started in 2005. So when VDI was really difficult, to deploy, we had a lot of challenges related to infrastructure. So since that, we've been doing a lot of improvement related to infrastructure and Horizon as well, which was viewed by the time, even VDM at the beginning. So we thought it would be a good idea to go back and have a look at what's new about Horizon, especially with the new release, which is Horizon 8 now. The last version is 2103. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time to show you what's in there, what's new, and I'm going to try to focus on what we believe are the most important features around Horizon, which will lead us to the second aspect, which will be the cloud pod architecture, which nowadays is something that a lot of customer is asking us to go through to design some cloud-enabled, Horizon deployment per se. And as we go through the cloud pod, I'm going to also talk about the NSX Advanced Load Balancer, which is the old name was AVI Networks, and how to use AVI with Horizon load balancing. And the last piece is something pretty new as well with Horizon, is the new universal broker, which can, help us also to grow and maybe to scale Horizon to not just the on-prem, but the cloud base as well. And maybe to have some hybrid cloud with some on-prem deployment with Horizon, but also some Horizon on the cloud using AWS or Azure as well. So yeah, I think I'm going to talk about that pretty much during the next 40 minutes. Again, so there's going to be, I wanted to give you that slide because I believe that the VDI is changing now. And in order to get to what I just told you about, like the cloud pod and trying to get, hybrid configuration, the first challenge is to go through what we call the non-persistent desktop. We already have some large company that already moved that from persistent to non-persistent, but that's I would say the main challenge with VDI nowadays. To be able to get to the cloud is first to have that first level, which is going to a non-persistent environment, which will, so if you go back to the slide, you see on the left, so if you are running VDI with persistent desktop, there's a lot of complexity behind. So it's difficult to manage, difficult to control, it's hard to back up and replicate between data center. And what I'm saying by persistent desktop is, if you provide VDI to an end user, which will have the rights to install application and to have the same desktop every day, like you have right now with their own laptop or desktops. So that means that there's going to be a lot of challenge to get to the cloud with that configuration. So what I'm saying is that the first level is to try to get to jump the gap between persistent and non-persistent. And nowadays, with what Horizon is providing us, a lot of new features that are very easy to manage and help the customer moving to a non-persistent environment. And when you get to the non-persistent environment, like it's written on the right, you see it's going to be much faster to deploy VDI or update VDI. So the latest configuration we did with some customer, it took about maybe 5 minutes or sometime up to 2 minutes. Just to deploy new version of Gold Image to, let's say 100 or 200 or 300 VDI in the same time. So that's very scalable. And in the meantime, it's more secure as well because it's a non-persistent. So anything that remain on the desktop, as soon as the user log off and log back in, everything's going to be fresh, new. So it's going to be more secure, easy to manage. And of course, cloud ready because it's a non-persistent VM. So basically you can connect from one side or you can connect on another site, on another data center, and you're gonna have the same look and feel, the same data, the same application. So that's the challenge. And that's what I wanted to explain here during that webinar, is to go through all the components of Horizon that will help you guys to move to a non-persistent desktop environment and then move to the cloud easily and have, like we have right there, some active data center. So that's something I'm going to try to focus today, is talking about how to get an active data center ready for Horizon. So in Horizon 8, there's a lot of new feature since between Horizon 7 and Horizon 8. I'm going to highlight the one I usually like and feel that it's what the customer are expecting for quite some time now. So the one on the left, you see there's a lot of new enhancements regarding communication, like Teams for sure, Cisco and Zoom. So all of those, they already provide some plugins that allow, offload of all the videos, audio into the clients. So that being said, so the reason to do so is to have a better, experience with your VDI, of course, because nowadays that's pretty much, what we use every day. So that's going to be the first item that is very important to have in mind. The second one I would say is about the instant clone features. So instant clone is not new. There was a feature already in places or in Horizon 7. But now with Horizon 8, that's the only way, the only solution you can use to be able to get to a non-persistent environment. So instant clone will help you deploy faster your VDI and also help you, managing all the new versions of the image you have. Let's say, for example, every week you have new Windows updates to apply to all your VDI. Well, that's how you're going to deploy those updates to the VDIs using the instant clone technologies, right? So that's something that has already been improved in the last version, which is Horizon 8 2103, which so 2103 just means that it's 2021 and it's 3, meaning that's the months. So that's how it's going to increment in the future as well. So there's also some new support coming with Horizon 8. For example, as I already said, so AVI is going to be one of them. Carbon Black for sure, for everything about antivirus and security. And also there's, as I said, a lot of multi-cloud options and support now. So it could be, with VMC, Google Cloud, Azure, on-prem. So that's something I'm going to try to cover today. And last is the REST API. So it's more for us in the technical team. It's more to use the API with Horizon. So now Horizon has REST API. So you can send, for example, you can create some script to automatically, upgrade or update the pools that you manage. So in case you have, let's say, 10 different pools because you have 10 different, business needs, then it's going to be much easier to do that with a script. And also it can help you to replicate, because one of the challenge with VDI, and I will talk to you about it right after, is to maintain also the gold image. So the gold image is the base image that you use to deploy all of the VDI, right? So if, let's say, you have like 3, 4, 5 different sites all across the world, you could easily replicate those because it's just single VM. So it's something that can be replicated through scripts. But in the meantime, with that script, you could also use the REST API from Horizon to update the pool. So if you have, again, if you have 8 different sites, it's going to be easier to use the API to update the pool as soon as the image is replicated all over the place. I want to go through also the Horizon core components just to make sure everybody else is on the same page. That's the first intro because it's very important to have that in mind before I can explain how the cloud pod architecture is going to work. And also with the universal broker, I'm going to talk about load balancing, global load balancing as well. So first off, let's talk about the basic of Horizon. So when you deploy Horizon, it's basically deploying a pod. So in that case, right there on the left, you have a single pod, very simple, just one connection server, which is the broker, and the Horizon client is connecting to the connection server. And then the second, so it's going to connect to the broker, so the connection server, just to get, the authentication. And then the Horizon client is going to connect directly to the Horizon desktop, to the Horizon agent, the virtual desktop. So when you connect from outside, because nowadays everybody's trying to use Horizon not only for internal connection, but for external access as well. So if you want to use Horizon with that use case that I'm talking about on the right, you can use the Unified Access Gateway, or what we can call the UAG. So the UAG is a component that is already part of the Horizon suite. It's a virtual appliance that you deployed as you deploy the connection server, and that entity will be hosted in the DMZ, for example. So that's going to be the only piece that will rely on the DMZ and that will provide access to your VDI from outside. So in that case, the Horizon client only connects to the access gateway. And then the access gateway is going to connect to the connection server for authentication, and then get back to the access gateway and connect to the Horizon agent. So as you can see in here, there's no direct connection between the Horizon client and the Horizon agent. It's going to go through the access gateways. So I wanted to explain that in case you've never really experienced about Horizon before. So now let's talk about the architecture behind Horizon. So more about the infrastructure and how it has to be organized in order to deploy Horizon. So we're going to call the Horizon pod. So a pod is a group of components from Horizon that will include the connection servers, the desktop pools. Let's say, for example, the vSphere cluster. So everything's going to be in a single place, considered as a pod. So and in that pod, you can have different resource block. So it can be, in case you have different business entities, it could be, for example, you have 2 different vCenters. You can use those 2 different vCenter and have being entitled in the same pod, right? And you can scale that as you grow. And then you're going to have to add the UAGs to be able to get access from outside and put that on the DMZ. So that was that's the initial, design with Horizon. It's basically vSphere components, vCenter, desktop pools, and then connection server and access gateways, right? And that's what we call the pod. But then I'm just trying to explain and show you how that evolved into the cloud pod that we're going to talk later on. So in that aspect, we have now 2 pods, right? You have 1 pod, for example, 2 different locations, or 2 different data center, even if they're in the same data center, you can have 2 pods, right? And in here, you see that you can even have the same vCenter across the 2 pods to be able to scale the limits of the vCenter. So that's also another design that you can make when you scale from 1 pod to another pod. Now let's talk about so we already talked about, that's really about the on-prem, that what I was explaining about. So now it's not just about the on-prem. Now Horizon, especially Horizon 8, and that begin with Horizon 7, that's why it's right there. But with Horizon 8, you have the capability to also connect those on-prem to something else. And you can use the Horizon Cloud Management Console to connect either way the on-prem deployment or something that you host with VMware Cloud on AWS or even Azure, right? So you have a way to get a subscription from Azure and deploy your own cloud-based Horizon in Azure. But that, for a lot of customers, they have a mix, right? They already have some on-prem deployment with Horizon, so they need to connect both in the same place. And that's how you're going to leverage the Horizon Cloud Management Console right there. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about that, and also how we can have the same access using the Horizon Universal Broker. So now let's get more into what is the actual cloud pod architecture, or what they call CPA. So a cloud pod architecture, as I was talking about, is, for example, in the right, you see right there, you have like 2 sites, 2 different sites. So it's 2 different pods. And then you're going to enable the cloud pod architecture between the 2 sites. So it's very simple. It's just in Horizon, in the 2 pods, you have to specify which is the site and which is the other site. And then they're gonna replicate. They're gonna replicate, for example, the pool. So you're gonna create what we call a global entitlement. So it's gonna be like a single pool, which will be available from the 2 sites, right? So, and that's the only way you can achieve that is by deploying 2 different separated pods. So, and I wanted to show you also, because sometimes we have some customer getting confused. It's not supported if you tried, for example, to have a same pod between 2 different sites. There's a lot of requirements, and and limitation with that. So again, it's not like you have different connection server and you're trying to connect them with a stretch, configuration. That's not going to work, and that's not even supported. And that's not how it should be designed. It should really be designed with separated pods. So you have one pod on one side, another pod on the other side, right? And that way, as you can see in the picture, that's how you can also get to an active-active situation. Or you can say active-passive as well, for sure. But I mean, the goal here, since a lot of customers already, invest in a lot of infrastructure to be able to do so, why not trying to achieve an active-active architecture? And the only way to get that active-active configuration will be to leverage what I said earlier, to be able to have the non-persistent desktop. And by that, I mean using some solution part of Horizon, like DEM, which is a dynamic environment manager that will help you to manage all the user settings, application settings, and also to use app volumes if needed to apply and deploy application on demand. And I'm going to cover that in the next slide. So I was talking about the dynamic environment manager, or it was called UEM before, user environment manager, but it changed the name in Horizon 8. So again, I like this tool because I think it's very important to have that in order to manage the user. Because if you go back and if you think about it again, I mean, the old design and the way why we're trying to do a non-persistent environment is basically about Windows, right? You're trying to get the same look and feel as a persistent desktop, meaning that when you connect to your Windows machine, you want to have the same, always your documents for sure, your all your data is going to be there. But also, for example, when you open Outlook, you want Outlook to be already configured, to have all the settings be persistent, because you don't want to re-enable every time the same features and the same options. So you need a software to be able to manage that. And that's where DEM is going to take place. So DEM is going to manage the user profile, the personal data, and everything about application as well. So again, as I said, if you have a corporate application that needs a lot of different configuration, so you're going to have, you could apply them as a predefined settings and then push those settings to all of the users, right? Or if some user needs some specific settings, UEM will save those application settings in a share folder, basically. And that share folder will be replicated through either way, storage replication or DFS replications. So that's about the user. The next aspect is also the VMware app volumes. So VMware app volumes is here to help you manage the application, as it says. So usually what we try to do, we try to get a simple base image or gold image, I would say. So something that doesn't have any application inside, or maybe just the application that are used by everyone in the company. Let's say Office, for sure, everybody's probably using Office. So that's something that you could install on the gold image. But then the rest of application, for depending on what business unit you're entitled, that's going to be managed by app volumes. So an app volume is about, you have the OS, you have the app volume agent in your desktop. And then the app volume is going to be able to, for example, in that case, deploy some core application, user application. And also you can also enable the writable volumes. So writable volumes is going to be, let me go back. So when you deploy core apps or user apps, that's going to be basically, technically, it's just a VMDK that's going to be assigned and attached to the VM. And it's going to be a read-only VMDK. So you captured VMDK with App Volume Manager. Let's say you have Adobe, for example. So you create your Adobe application. It's going to be like a VMDK application. That VMDK will be assigned and attached to all the VDIs. And that's going to be assigned when the user will log into his VDI. The writable volume, as it says, it's not read-only, it's writable. So it's one per user. So the only reason to do so is that in case you have some user that needs some persistency with application that needs to install by themselves, you know, for example, some developers needs that. If that's not part of the gold image, or if that's not part of the app stack or the application that has been deployed using app volumes, that's something that you could use as well. I personally try to avoid that because then it's a little bit complicated. You end up with some writable volumes per user, so it's difficult to manage, and you go back to the first challenge with, you know, persistent desktop basically. So you really want to avoid that. So it's really a use case when you don't have a choice and you have some user that really needs to install their own application every day. So then that could be a good use case. But in the meantime, if it's a development application, you probably need to go back and just create an application with that and create an app volume application and deliver that application to all the users that has been assigned to the development team, for example. So anyway, so that was the how you can create a cloud pod architecture is by first creating the stacks that are needed. So the stacks are basically the pods. So you need at least 2 pods to be able to enable the cloud pod architecture. And then you need to make sure that you have a full non-persistent environment. And by achieving that, you need to have instant clone enabled pools with DEM enabled as well. And also app volume is needed if the application you try to deliver are not part of the gold image, right? So now let's talk about how to connect and how it is configured and what's the different option you can configure for the cloud pod architecture. Meaning I'm going to go through the load balancing mechanism, because right now I didn't really talk about load balancer. I just talk about Horizon components. But now let's say we wanted to achieve a high availability. That's why we're trying to configure a cloud pod with what I said, an active-active configuration. So in that case, you could use Avi, which is a good software to work with, especially with Horizon, because Avi, which is now NSX Advanced Load Balancer, it's something very interesting because it's scalable. So and it's scalable as you grow. So as you need and as you receive traffic, it's going to grow and scale and deploy new load balancer on demand. So that's really what I like about Avi, and it's a very simple solution to deploy. You need to first deploy the control plane, which is the Avi controller. So we usually deploy 3 VMs for the Avi controllers. And then as soon as you deploy the Avi controllers, you can create a data plane. So the data plane is what is basically the load balancer itself. So you can have different virtual services. Let's say in our case, since we have Horizon, as you remember, Horizon, you have different components. You have the connection servers, you have the access gateways, and you have also the app volume managers. So it's 3 different components that you need to load balance, right? So in that case, for example, very simply, you need at least 3 virtual services, right? Like any load balancer, like F5, GAMP, Netscaler, they all provide the same, configuration. So in a background with Avi, you need to deploy service engine. So the Avi controller, which is the cluster, is going to deploy the service engine as you grow again. So you're going to have probably to start with at least 2 service engine per virtual component. So if you need to load balance the access gateway, you need at least 2 service engine. And then if you see that you reach out a lot of different connection coming from outside, then you can enable Avi to grow those service engine as they receive more connections. Right. So let's take an example. So that's usually what we try to design when we deploy Avi with the access gateway. So in that configuration, as you see again, this is a cloud pod. We have 2 sites. So that could be the same with 3 or 4 sites, just trying to get them all on the same deck right there. But in here, we have two sites. So on each side, you see we have a pod, two pods, right? So on one pod, the one on the top, you have two connection server, two access gateway. And then on the right, you have the backend, which is, again, the vSphere components, the VM, and things like that. What we need to load balance in here with Horizon is first the connection servers and also the access gateway, right? So that's what you're going to use AVI for. So the AVI controllers, so you're going to need one AVI controller per site, right? And they're all going to be communicate to each others. And then the AVI controller will deploy the load balancer that are needed in front of the access gateway or the connection server. So that's how it is supposed to be designed. Give you a little bit of more background about how it is configured and where the connection is going to take place. So if you look at this design, which is just a single pod, so in that single pod, you have one service engine that balances the access gateway and another service engine in the middle that is load balancing the connection servers. So the reason we do that as well is to be able to manage either way the external connections. So all the users coming from outside using internet to connect to their VDI, they're going to go through the service engine. And then the service engine in front of the access gateway is going to communicate with the service engine in front of the connection server. But what happens if you have some user connected inside the company? So what we call the internal users. So the internal user, most of the time, you don't want them to go back outside and go back to the DMZ. So you want them, they're already in place. So you just want them to connect to the connection server. That's why then you have a direct connection from the internal clients to the service engine in front of the connection servers. So that way you can handle, you know, the two different connections, either way, if it comes from outside or from inside. Now, let me give you a little bit about a more detail about how it works and how the connection is going to work. So with AVI, as you can see here, the first connection, and that's just an Horizon configuration. First, when the Horizon client tries to authenticate, he uses a primary protocol, which is an XML API. So this connection is the 443 connection that you probably already knows. So it's going to do the authentication. So you go through the access gateway, and then the access gateway is going to rely on the connection server to do the authentication. And if you remember, we have an AD, so it's going to do also the authentication with AD right there. As soon as the authentication is enabled and validated, then the connection, you have a secondary protocol, which is, you know, it could be BLAST. So it's really about the remote protocol itself. So then it should go to the same UAG to get the same, because if you don't go to the same UAG, you lost your authentication, because the UAG is handling the security and the authentication. So you have to have some kind of persistency on the path. So that's why the second path is also connecting to the access gateway and get through to the virtual desktop. Now, so that's very simple. I would say that's a simple deployment with AVI. Now let's talk about the global load balancer. Because again, what we're trying to achieve here was to try to get to an active-active configuration with the cloud pod architecture, meaning that you want the user to benefit from the two sites or the two data center you have, right? So in order to work this way, probably what you want to do is to have a single namespace, right? Like, I don't know if that's, yeah, I have that in here. So let's say we have a customer, which with a FQDN, which is customer.com. So what you wanted to try to achieve is to have the same name and to redirect the user either way, depending on the home site that has been defined in the cloud pod, or if there's no home site defined, you just want to split the connection between the two sites, right? So, and you need a mechanism to make sure that the two sites are available. So the component that you're going to have is a global load balancer. So for example, in AVI, you can deploy, that's what you see right there in orange. You have one single VM that is deployed on each site. And that VM is just handling the DNS queries. like any global load balancer. That's not really new. So I just wanted to explain that because we have a lot of customers asking about it, and sometimes it's getting confused for some of our. So let me explain how it works. So the first thing it's going to do, so let's say you have an external client. I'm just going to talk about external connection, right? Because if it's connecting from inside, then you connect to the one you're already there. And then if it's not going to work, you're still going to go through probably the interconnection between the two data centers. So you're not going to go from outside. So the challenge is for an external user to connect from outside and be able to be redirected to the site where there's the least connection, or if it's a site that is failing, you have a mechanism to redirect you to the available sites. So we're using the global load balancer. So with Avi, the first thing it's going to do when you launch the Horizon clients, it's going to do a query for the public DNS. So it's going to go to the public DNS, try to resolve that. It's not going to be customer.com. It's going to be probably, horizon.customer.com or vdi.customer.com. So the only thing you need to do, there's no A recorded there on your public DNS. The public DNS, you should just say to delegate DNS request for that horizon or vdi.customer.com to the two public IPs that are facing the global load balancer, as you can see in the pictures. So in the picture right there, you have one Avi global load balancer with a public NAT IP, which is 8.33.234.100 on the left, and the other one is 4.7, whatever. So the only thing it's going to do is going to do a delegation, DNS delegation. So you go back, then the second step is to go back to the Avi global load balancer, and then the client is going to query that horizon.customer.com to check what's the IP for that FQDN. So then the global load balancer gives them, as you can see right there, on the global load balancer, you have that resolution. So basically the global load balancer is just doing a DNS resolution, right? Nothing else. So the next step is for the global load balancer to return the public IP for the Horizon name to the client. So that's what we have right there. So you need another public IP for sure. So that other public IP, it's not going to be the same as the Avi. So it's going to be the one you see on the left, for example, which is the 8.33.234.101. And this one then, that's the final connection. So then the Horizon client will initiate the connection to that pass. Depending on which site is available, is going to go to a site or another one, but directly connecting, as you can see in the picture, on the load balancer that is balancing the connection to the access gateway, right? So that's a little bit more detail about the Avi global load balancer, if you will. So now let's talk about the Horizon Universal Broker. I think this is a new component that is really interesting because, as you can see, before we used the global load balancer, which is, to me, it's the preferred configuration to get to an active configuration, because the global load balancer is aware of which site is available and they're both communicating to each other. So if one site fails, the connection will go to the other site. Although Horizon also provides a universal broker. So the universal broker, remember, it's something that is hosted at VMware. So it's like having, I would say, it's like having a connection server on the cloud, in the cloud. So it's like having a witness, I would say. I think about it this way, like a witness connection server available. So same thing here, we have the two sides, right? In this design, we don't have any load balancer. And let me explain why, because we do have some customer that doesn't have load balancer. Either way, it's too expensive, or they think they don't probably need that right there. So there's a way to also not using any load balancer will be to benefit from the access gateway. So in the access gateway, the Horizon Access Gateway, there's an HA feature that you can use. And when you enable the HA between two access gateway, it will provide you with a VIP. So basically doing the same as the load balancer does. And then in that configuration, it's a little bit different because, as you can see, you don't have a load balancer between the access gateway and the connection server, meaning that each access gateway connected directly to a dedicated connection server. So that way, it's great because it's you're going to be able to load balance the connection from outside. Although you could have another challenge from internal connection, right? So if someone tried to connect from inside, since you don't have any load balancer in front of the connection server, that design will probably prefer for even the internal user to connect to the DMZ for the access gateway. So it's really a matter of, requirement for the customer. But technically, it's going to be the same. So the internal connection is going to connect to the VIP in front of the access gateway. So in that universal broker, if I get back to it, so in that picture, we don't have any global load balancer. Although what you could use, we could use the Horizon Cloud universal broker, meaning that you're going to connect the first connection the Horizon client is going to do from outside is reaching out to that public, IP or public QDN that is hosted by VMware, and that component will be aware of the two different pods that you have right there. So the Horizon universal broker is also connected to the two pods, to the two on-prem pods. So he's aware if one pod is not available. That way, it's going to redirect the user to the second side. So using the universal broker is, again, it's some sort of witness that is aware of the sites. And there's also another components that I talked earlier about, which is when you enable the cloud pod, one of the features you can benefit from is the home site configuration. So in the cloud pod, you can specify which user should be entitled to which physical data center or physical pod. So that way, for example, if you have two sites, one in America and the other one in Europe, and you already know which user are coming from Europe, probably you need to configure some sort of home site for them. So it means that it's going to be the preferred route. It doesn't mean that they have to go there. It's going to be the preferred path. So even if the path is not available and you have a home site, you will still connect to the other sites anyway. It's just the preferred path. So let's say the user are in North America, they try to connect to the pod. So if the Horizon pod is enabled and available, they will connect in America. But even if they have a home site in America and America where the pod site is not available, they will connect back to Europe, right? So that's how the universal broker is going to work. So it's another approach, I would say. It's interesting because it's not something you have on-prem. It's really about the cloud. And it also helps you probably to move into some Horizon Cloud pod as well. I mean, not Cloud pod, but Horizon Cloud solution. As I said, you can use Horizon also to deploy VMs in Azure. So in case you have that requirements, you could have the same. You could use the universal broker to broker the user connection between on-prem or in the cloud. And you can even think about the cloud as maybe a real third side DR. So let's say the two on-prem are down, you can still spin up some VDI in Azure. And so the user can still connect, even if the two sides are down, they can still connect using the universal broker into the Azure desktop that are hosted over there. So that could be also, I think, the goal for that universal broker is to help the customer going to some Horizon Cloud as well, or to be able to achieve an hybrid configuration. And so, so I put the sizing requirement per pod that you can see right there. This is usually the design that I like to provide to a lot of my customer. It's very simple, as you can see, it doesn't require much. Just we're gonna end up with 24 vCPU and 56 gig of RAM per pod, so it's not something that is not achievable. And in the meantime, as you can see, one of the challenges is going to be to replicate those golden image, as I said before. So since you have 2 pods, you have to manage. Usually I try to ask the user, the customer, to define a first site as the preferred site to manage. And so all the golden image going to be managed on the first site. And then we created some replication. It could be either way with a storage replication. It could be a DFS replication as well, to replicate the gold image to the second site. And then we have another script that's going to update the Horizon pool using the API call. So that way, if you do a change in one gold image on one side, it's going to replicate that same one everywhere in all the other pod that has been created earlier. Yeah, so as I said, I think that's probably the last slide I have. So the universal broker, as I said, can be also used if you have a lot of different geographic sites. That's also something that I didn't talk about with the AVI Global Load Balancer. The AVI Global Load Balancer as a feature to check the location as well. So in AVI with the Global Load Balancer, as I described before, if you are close to one site, it will prefer the sites you're close to, right? And that's going to be, I think that's going to be the same with the universal broker. He's aware of which site you're connected to. So that way, if one site fails, it will connect you back to the other one. So that's pretty awesome to me. And that's really what is going to be the future with Horizon, since we have so much demand with so many customers right now trying to achieve, a lot of remote connection as they can. I think that's one of the key features to be able to get that. That was just a quick snapshot of how it is configured, just to let you know. So when you connect to the universal broker, you can create some pools, same way as you create the pools in on-prem. You see it's right there. You can create a desktop in Azure, you can create on-prem, or you can create in AWS, right? So it's pretty interesting. That will help you to achieve like a multi-cloud assignment as well. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to talk to you about today about Horizon 8. There's a lot of challenges still with Horizon. I mean, it's not about Horizon, it's going to be about the desktop itself, trying to achieve a non-persistent. I think it's the first step, and it's still maybe the most challenging step for all of our customers. It's not even depending on the infrastructure behind. I think we have everything we need. The network is more than sufficient nowadays to host the VDI you need. You have the IOPS that are needed now, so it's not an issue anymore. So technically speaking, I think we have everything that we need to get to where we want to go, which is trying to achieve an active situation, a multi-cloud environment, and things like that. So I guess if you have a question, I think we have about 10 minutes left, or it's so to get to any question, if you have some.
Any thoughts or questions? Javier, it's pretty much up to you.
That's one. No, to be honest, it's been a little too much information for me. I mean, we don't have any experience with Horizon at all. So for me, this 1,000 feet view of everything involved in this webinar has been a lot. So a question that I would have is, can we get a recording of this webinar, or are we gonna get a link to review it again?
Yes, so the
To
short answer
process
is
it.
yes. This is going straight onto YouTube. So if you
Okay.
go to the 27 Virtual YouTube channel, you'll actually see some of our other webinars. It's actually, we also have it posted in the events section of our website, which takes you to the YouTube channel.
Okay.
So if you just go, 27 Virtual YouTube and VMware, then you'll see our NSX webinars, you'll see security webinars. We're going to post this one up here so you can review it. So we're adding content to there as much as we can. We're trying to create a podcast and post the audio on the YouTube channel as well. So trying to get more and more content out there for everybody.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. There's something I we need to review. I mean, we don't have like I said, we don't have Horizon yet up and running, but this will help when we get there.
All right. So to everybody out there who listened to this or watched this on YouTube, thank you. Javier, thanks for joining, and all the participants, thanks for joining. And we will talk to you soon. Thank you, Damien.
Thank you. Bye.